Sanbonani, good evening, Dumalang, and welcome to episode 149 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. It's a Friday edition of the Private Property Podcast. You can see I'm already in weekend mode, and I'm sure many of you are. Welcome to our viewers on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. Welcome to the Private Property Podcast. If this is the first time that you're joining us, then do go back to some of the old episodes that we've had, really great episodes that covers issues that cater to both tenants, landlord, builder, or even a property investor. It doesn't matter where in your property journey you are. We cater for all of your property needs. This evening, we're having a conversation that's actually such I'll say a difficult one, can be a very touchy one, that affects quite a number of us, whether you're a tenant or on the landlord side. But before I get into that one, you know that we've been running that awesome competition this week where we wanted to know, what kind of personality kind of fits the house that you might aspire to. And we asked you to go onto the private property website, take a screenshot of a property that fits your personality, and then explain to us why that particular house fits your personality. We're going to be announcing the winner live on air this evening later on. So if you want to stay tuned and find out who walks away with that 1,000 Rand cash prize, then do stay tuned to the show. I'm quite excited about the winner. You're going to have to find out who the winner is, and they walk away with that 1,000 Rand cash prize. We're also cooking something very special for you. Monday is our 150th episode, and you know that we like celebrating the big episodes. We did it for the 50th episode, we did it for the 100th episode, and we're going to be doing it for episode 150. I'm quite excited to be hearing quite a lot from you, and I'm sure over the weekend you'll be keeping in touch with us across our social media platforms, so you can already get the teaser of what you can expect for Monday's show. Some of the, actually, let me not even give it away, because I nearly gave away a little bit of what you can expect on Monday. All I can say is you do not want to miss it, from what the content is going to be, from what the prizes are going to be. That's something that you can look forward to. Now, to get started with this evening's conversation, I did say that this one is quite a difficult one, because sometimes we find ourselves in this one, whether you're a tenant or a landlord, it is one of those things that you very likely might have to deal with once during your tenant journey or your landlord journey. And we're saying, here's what you need to do when a tenant disputes a property damage claims. And this is at landlords, but we also want to be looking at what tenants should and shouldn't be doing along this journey. Oftentimes, a lot of us, you get into a rental agreement, you obviously pay that deposit amount. Sometimes it might be a month's rental. Some places want maybe 2 months rental. And there's something that's supposed to happen to that deposit. We're going to be looking at what is the purpose of the deposit, what you're going to be using it for, what you're responsible for if you're the tenant in terms of damages, and the responsibility that the landlord also has. And then, of course, in the unfortunate instance where at the end of the lease agreement, both parties almost dispute, what has broken down in the apartment, then what exactly are you able to do to help us better understand how to navigate this one, because it is a legal one. We often talk about the importance of understanding your lease agreement, making sure that you read every single line, and if you don't, ask the agent you're dealing with or the landlord that you're dealing with before you sign on that dotted line, because more often than not, these are the kinds of things that come back to bite you at the end of that lease agreement. I'm joined by somebody who doesn't need any introduction to the Private Property Podcast viewers. It is Laurent, who is a senior associate at SSLR Incorporated. Claire, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zama. It's such a pleasure to be back.
It's only a pleasure, Claire. I think before we even look at what needs to happen once there's a dispute, let's start with the deposit, the use of a deposit, and what happens when a tenant has placed a deposit, whether to directly to the landlord or to the agency that the landlord is working with.
Right. So, well, first and foremost, just some of the basics regarding a rental security deposit. So in most instances, a landlord will request a deposit. There's no hard and fast rule. A lot of the times people can't understand maybe why a landlord would be requesting a deposit equivalent to 2 months. But basically the Rental Housing Act stipulates that the landlord may not request a deposit more than what the parties have essentially agreed to. So the purpose of a security deposit, I think the clue is in the name, basically to be kept until the end of the lease term for the purposes of securing the landlord's right to get the property back in the same condition in which it was given to the tenant. So one thing of importance is that when the landlord requests a deposit, that will be paid usually prior to commencement of the lease agreement and is either paid to an agent or to the landlord. It is the landlord's responsibility to ensure that the rental deposit is invested in an interest-bearing account with a financial institution, and that it accrues an interest portion over the lease period.
And then, Claire, maybe let's go to, because now we understand, and I'm sure a lot of people have come to know that you pay a deposit when you rent a place. So at least now we understand where that money is going and the fact that it's security. Perhaps then let's look at what can and cannot be done with that deposit, because I think that's also something that tends to be quite a very big bone of contention, because one of the clauses that would typically be found, for example, in a very good lease agreements is that you can't say that for that last month of renting that you're going to use the deposit money, because some tenants want to argue, well, I already paid you the deposit, so that last month I'm not going to pay rent. You can just take the, the deposit money. And there's always a clause that's quite explicit about how you can't do that. You still need to pay that last month's rental. So let's look at then what can and cannot be done with that deposit amount.
Okay, so well, that's exactly that's every reputable lease agreement would say that. But I think it's important to note that unless the parties agree that the deposit may be utilized during the subsistence of the lease term, the landlord is not allowed to touch that deposit. The deposit is it is invested specifically for the tenant's benefit. So the landlord may not touch the deposit during the subsistence of the lease term unless there is an agreement between himself and the tenant. Then with regards to at the end of the lease, what may or may not happen with the deposits depends on what the parties have done. So first of all, an inspection, obviously an ingoing inspection should be done, and that should be recorded. The state of the property must be recorded so that we can ascertain at the end of the lease term if there are any damages or breakages, which are for the tenant's account. So that's sort of first and foremost. During the lease term, that money should stay invested. In terms of the Rental Housing Act, the tenant does have a right to request proof that the landlord has in fact invested the deposits, and also to request proof of the interest which is accrued on the deposit, which is something the landlord will then have to produce. So then, when we reach then the end of the lease term, in most cases, the Act envisages that a outgoing inspection will need to take place. So that typically should take place, upon the tenant's exit, and the damages will be assessed. Insofar as what can and cannot be deducted from the deposit once the exit inspection has been held, depends on whose responsibility a repair or maintenance item fell on. So generally, your lease agreement will state responsibilities of the landlord and the tenant. The unfair practice regulation to the Rental Housing Act do stipulate in broad terms, generally what a landlord is responsible for and what a tenant is responsible for. In common law, practice has developed that a landlord is more than not responsible for structural repairs and damages. The tenant is responsible for maintenance. Now, there's unfortunately no hard and fast rule of, there's not a manual that I can produce. There might be a manual, but there's no specific legislation that I can point you to say, well, in this scenario, tenant is liable for X, Y, and Z. So I would say people need to adopt a common sense approach when looking at the damages, and also, you know, within which what should be reasonably, you know, so what I'm pointing at is that the landlord should not get overinflated quotations when affecting repairs. This then brings me, sorry.
No, Claire, I was actually going to say that this probably brings us to almost the fair wear and tear, right? Because that's also, it's almost like a nice segue to looking at what is fair wear and tear. Because as you're saying that if the tenant is in charge of the maintenance, and often the landlord deals with, you know, repairs of particularly like the structural stuff, as much as there's nothing we'll say in the legislation that gives you every possible scenario, what typically constitutes fair wear and tear in a property?
Right. So this is an interesting one in the sense that I do, as an attorney, you know, in this field, I do see sometimes a landlord may try to claim for a fair wear and tear item, such as, for instance, if it's been a 4-year lease, typically a property would need a refresher paint job. I would say every 4 or 5 years. This is a maintenance item which the landlord would have any event had to attend to. And so yes, where the tenant has possibly driven screws or nails into the wall, and that needs to be repaired, by all means, that may be claimed for against the deposit. But you can't claim for painting your entire property from a tenant's rental deposit. And you know, paint dulls. I've seen in other instances where a landlord might have a white carpet. You know, unfortunately, a white carpet is not a durable solution, and unfortunately, with everyday use or fair wear and tear, that you know, the carpet will not stay in the same condition, and those items cannot be claimed for against the rental deposits.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's a part of me that almost wants to say, especially to landlords, that you must almost look at how you are in your own property, and the things that do wear and tear, right? And we're not thinking of stuff where you would have probably either deliberately or perhaps it was by mistake broken something, but things that would typically just wear and tear because you live in that particular property. And those are the kinds of things that you shouldn't then be expecting to have your tenant pay for them. Because I've also seen instances where landlords almost want to pull a fast one on their tenants because oftentimes they have the funds, right? And tenants will keep sending emails. They very likely don't have either the knowledge about how they can remedy that kind of conflict with their landlord, or they certainly don't have, the funds to quickly have a chat to an attorney to say, listen, my landlord is not giving me back my deposit. What can I do? So I do urge landlords to also be just very mindful of that, and just don't scam people. I think, you live in your own property, you know the things that would typically, get damaged in a property when you live in it. So you almost need to be mindful. And if anything, if you're a good landlord, you budget for those things. We always talk about when you are a landlord, things that you need to be able to budget for, things that you need to be able to plan for, things that you know that X amount of money of the rental amount is going towards things that you're going to be maintaining, let's say in 3 or 5 years time. So whether it's the paint job or whatever major work that you would have wanted to do in that particular property. So don't almost try to budget on your tenant's deposit. Yeah. That's not how you should be doing it, because I think they almost look at how tenants don't know their own rights as much as possible. And I want to know from viewers at home, I mean, if you're a tenant, has that ever happened to you? Have you had difficulties before accessing your deposit from your landlord? And what was the scenario? What excuse or reason did the landlord give you for withholding your deposit amount? And at the end, were you able to get that deposit amount, or did you end up just getting so exhausted from the back and forth that you ended up moving on? And I think also from a landlord's point of view, has there been an instance where your tenant, you had to deduct funds from your tenant's deposit because there were certain things that needed to be fixed that they had damaged during their stay in your property? And what were those things? Did they dispute the particular deduction, or did they almost accept from the get-go that, look, I actually know that I messed this particular thing up, so I know that money needs to be deducted? Do share your experiences with us down here below, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or on Instagram. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, we'll then be looking at those scenarios where what then happens when we're in those predicaments, because I think sometimes we don't quite know where to go. We're also going to be looking at the timeframes that the landlords have after they've done that exit inspection and they need to be giving your deposit back, and whether or not they're also keeping to that, because I've also seen landlords withholding that deposit for a very long period of time. So we're going to be exploring those just after the break. Welcome back to the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. This is that show that you watch just before you get your weekend started, or perhaps you've already started with your weekend plans and you're watching us as you're slowly, coming down and getting ready for the weekend that is coming up. Well, this evening we are talking about something that a lot of us get affected by here on the Private Property Podcast. You might be watching us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, or on Instagram. Welcome to all our viewers. And as I said before the break, I want to hear from viewers at home. We are talking about here's what to do when your tenant disputes property damage claims, and it really is geared a lot towards landlords. But I want to hear from both sides of, from both landlords and tenants. From tenants, I certainly want to hear from you if you've ever been in a situation where your landlord didn't want to give back your deposit amount at the end of the lease agreement. What were the reasons that the landlord cited, and were you eventually able to get your deposit money back, or was it such a long back and forth that you ended up giving up? And from landlords, I want to hear whether you've ever had to have a situation where you had to deduct certain amounts from the deposit amount because of certain damage to the property that your tenant essentially had during their stay. Do share with us down here below. We want to hear from you. Something that we also wanted to hear from you that we really got an overwhelming response was, of course, wanting to match a property to your personality. We asked you to go onto the private property website on www.privateproperty.co.za and take a screenshot of any property that you see on the website that matches your personality, and then explain to us how that particular property matches your personality. And that was a competition that we're running this evening, or this week rather, where you stood a chance of walking away with 1,000 rands in cash. We will be announcing that winner at the end of the program, so that's something to look forward to. I hope that the winner is also going to be watching. It is quite exciting. I think it's a nice way to start your weekend. You walk away with a 1,000 rands. And I think if you want to stay tuned for more giveaways, we are celebrating episode 150 on Monday. So that's something that you can look forward to. I'm not going to give away anything in terms of what we're going to be doing there. I can say that it is going to be quite a special episode. So do make sure that you set those alarm clocks for 7 p.m. Get your friends and your friends' to tune in. That's the one episode that you do not want to miss. Now, this evening, I'm speaking to Claire Laurent, who's a senior associate at SSLR Incorporated, and she's helping us navigate this particular issue because it is a legal one. It isn't just okay, I feel like it, I don't feel like it. It is a legal matter that we all have to understand, whether you're a landlord or you're a tenant, and really get a good sense of what can and cannot be done, what you should and shouldn't be doing within the ambit of this particular issue. So, Claire, when I then look at the deposit, we spoke about the deposit earlier on. We spoke about, fair wear and tear, the kinds of damages that could potentially happen, who's responsible for what in terms of what's happening inside the property. We're now at the end of, the lease agreement, and maybe let's paint two scenarios. At the beginning of the lease agreement, an entry inspection was done, everybody was happy, and we signed for, the state of the apartment. Now at the end of the lease agreement, let's create two scenarios, one where an exit inspection is done, and another where an exit inspection is not done. And let's assume in both those instances, a tenant, there's a bit of damage in the property that a landlord can essentially, deduct money from the deposit. How do you go about managing that one? Because on the one hand, when you look at let's say the person where the exit inspection has been done, in that scenario, let's assume the tenant doesn't want to sign the exit inspection. So almost agreeing that certain things are damaged. And then obviously the one where there's no exit inspection, there was nothing to sign. And let's assume that both parties, the landlord didn't say we're having this exit inspection at this time. The tenant ends up moving out. Or sometimes, because I've heard of these situations where a tenant will move out, let's say a week after they've moved out, they'll say, I've moved out. This, left the key with security. And when you go there, they have in fact moved all their things. The key is in fact with security. So there was no opportunity to actually do an exit inspection. How do we then deal with those two seemingly different scenarios?
Okay, well, the Rental Housing Act, specifically Section 5.3, deals with exactly those two scenarios. So let's do the scenario in the instance where the landlord, there's no exit inspection done. So the Act says that in the absence of an exit inspection being conducted in the presence of the tenant, it is deemed by the landlord as an acknowledgement that the property is in a good state of repair. So technically, the landlord would not be able to make any claims against the rental deposit if there is no exit inspection that is done. The Act does provide for a scenario where the landlord has requested the tenant to be present at the exit inspection, but the tenant is not interested, and the Act caters for that and says, landlord, you need to do your exit inspection within 7 days of the cancellation of the lease agreement, and thereafter you have a period of 14 days in which to refund the balance of the rental deposit, if any, to the tenant. So those are the sort of the two umbrellas, that fall under, if there's no inspection done. If there is, ideally the inspection should be done, and it should be, recorded in a formal exit inspection, which is then compared against the incoming inspection. The Act envisages that it should take place 2 days before the tenant vacates. But, practically it's difficult to do an inspection when the tenant is still in the process of moving out. So generally we try to, we advise parties to arrange the exit inspection as soon as possible after they've vacated. And then if there are damages to the property, the landlord is required to basically get quotes, attend to the repairs, and then has a period of 14 days within which to refund the deposit from such date that the repairs have been effected. So this is often confused in practice, where tenants read 14 days and they think their deposit will be refunded within 14 days of the exit inspection, which is not necessarily the case. The landlord has 14 days from the date that the repairs are actually carried out. If there are no repairs, which is, it's quite rare, usually there's something or other, the Act says that the full deposit and rental, the interest which is accrued on the deposit, must be refunded to the tenant within no later than 7 days. So there are different timeframes that cater for different scenarios, and I think both parties should know their rights and responsibilities when it comes to that.
So then, Claire, this then brings us to that unfortunate, scenario where there's contestation around the damages in the property from, let's say, either one of the two parties, whether the tenant is saying, listen, this was the way that it was, or I'm not liable for that particular thing, or the landlord, let's say, is saying that a tenant should be liable for a particular thing that, let's say, a tenant shouldn't necessarily be liable for. Then how do we essentially deal with those or remedy those kinds of scenarios?
Yeah, it becomes almost like a stalemate. The difficulty is, especially in an instance where the landlord already has the deposit, and there's no deposit, and what then does the tenant do? Or where perhaps the deposit is invested with the managing agents. The managing agents also have a responsibility, and as much as they have a mandate from their client, they have an ethical responsibility towards the tenant, and to ensure that there are no unfounded deductions made against the rental deposit. Now, I think we mentioned on the last occasion, litigation is becoming too expensive, and our courts are inundated with all different types of matters, but more and more we're seeing a move towards less litigation and more mediation and meaningful settlement negotiations to try and resolve disputes. I think the Rental Housing Tribunal it's sort of got this reputation of being
and we seem to have lost Claire there for a moment. We're going to get her back shortly. And I think she was actually touching on something that's so important when we look at how the courts are inundated. You don't want to go the litigation route. Nobody ever wants to go the litigation route. So then how do we best manage that particular issue? I see that we do have Claire back on the line with us. Claire, you were saying? Well, it seems like the tech gremlins have actually got the better of us this evening. We're going to see if Claire's going to be able to get back. I see she is slightly struggling. Claire, are you able to hear us now?
Sorry about that, Zama. Yeah, I had obviously an internet issue just as I was getting to the hot point.
Well, now I think everybody waited in anticipation. Now we're ready for it.
So the position is that, well, I was saying that the tribunal's been regarded as this tenant forum, but practically it is the cheapest forum for parties to approach and to mediate the matter. And if there's a deadlock, if the tenant feels that perhaps the landlord has made unfounded claims against the against the deposit, then parties are at liberty to approach a tribunal. And what's quite nice is I see that in Gauteng, the tribunal's conducting hearings electronically, just as you and I now. Short of a few internet difficulties, it is very convenient in the sense that you don't have to take 5 hours out of your day to go to the offices of the tribunal. These are quick mediation, and if the matter can't be resolved on mediation, the matter is then referred to arbitration, where an arbiter will make a final decision on the matter. And I think parties need to be more open to approaching the tribunal as a forum which can resolve their issue.
Claire, before I let you go, any tips for both parties, both landlord and tenants, when it comes to the issue of potential damage to the property and the claim that can be made to the deposit at the end of the lease agreement? Any tips you'd like to share about things we should be thinking of even before we sign the lease agreement to make that process easier? Because I think one of the big things is sometimes both landlord and tenant don't quite have a good understanding of the lease agreement. Landlords will sometimes get a lot of these, lease agreements online, and they themselves haven't gone through, everything that's in there extensively. So what should both parties be very mindful of when it comes to potential damage to the property and the claim that the landlord can make to the deposit at the end of the lease agreement?
Yeah, I think the biggest tip I would say is be communicative with your landlord if you're a tenant. If there is a damage which has occurred and it is your fault, even during the lease term, advise the landlord and make sure that you're on the same page with regards to whose responsibility it would be to cover that. I've seen scenarios where a tenant will maybe keep quiet about an issue. For instance, maybe some floorboards are starting to lift, which then makes typically that is a landlord problem. But because of the fact that he hasn't told the landlord, hey, there's this problem that you need to attend to, it then, and if the problem worsens, the landlord can then hold the tenant liable for those damages simply because he didn't tell the landlord that was a problem when it occurred.
And I think that is one of the really big things, Claire, and you've just mentioned it, is we need to be able to communicate with each other. The tenant and the landlord have open communication about certain matters. If you are dealing with the agent, then communicate the matter with the agent. I know sometimes a lot of tenants have complained that agents don't respond to some of their messages, or that the landlord is now snagging. And I know things can get hectic, especially you're a landlord, perhaps you have a few properties, but you also have your own actual day job. So it's easy to sometimes not be on top of certain things when your tenant is communicated with them. But it really is so crucial to try and have your finger on the pulse when it comes to those things, because sometimes a minor damage that your own tenant will bring to your attention, you let it slide, or you think actually it's not an emergency, I'll deal with it another time, can potentially end up being something that's very big and that you have to cough up quite a lot of money for. So make sure that you always have that open communication with your tenant. And if you're a landlord, also make sure that you speak to your tenant as regularly as possible. Well, Claire, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for that one. I sure do hope that viewers at home have a better sense of what can and cannot be done and how to best manage this one, especially right now. I know some people are either finishing off their leases now in November or even December, and there might be damages perhaps, and sometimes some of the landlords might not give back people's deposits, especially when your lease expires in December. So really do be careful to make sure that these things are communicated in time. So thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you, Zama.
And that is Claire Laurent, who is a senior associate at SSLR Incorporated. Well, that brings us almost to the end of our show. I did say that we will be announcing the winner of that 1,000 Rand cash prize. We asked you this week to share with us a property that you found on privateproperty.co.za. Share why that particular property matches your personality. And the person who posted the best reason why a particular property that's found on privateproperty.co.za matches their property is going to be the winner. And that winner, I'm actually going to first read their story. It might slightly give away who the winner is, or they might know who they are, obviously, as we go through this one. But I absolutely loved their post. And their reason goes as follows. It says, this beautiful house in Midrand is so me. I love a beautiful garden, but maintenance is a challenge for me. Therefore, the artificial grass works perfectly for me as it will not require a lot of time and water. We all know water is a scarce resource. When my friend Gateko Akhape visits, she'll have her own space at the flatlet and we won't have to be in each other's faces. Hey, this one can talk the whole year if she wants to. The pool, oh my God, who would not want to see themselves in a pool like this one on a Sunday afternoon? This house has my name written all over it, and I will work triple as hard to get my hands on it. Hashtag your space, your rules with the green hearts. I love this post. And this one actually came from one of the top fan gang members on our Facebook page, and that is Ubongani Mapunda. Bongani Queen B Mapunda, congratulations. You walk away with that 1,000 Rand cash prize. One of the things that I also, liked because we picked it up as I was going through this is that Ubongani, who's a top fan gang member, as well as Ungateko, who's also a top fan gang members, are actually friends in real life. So I love that one. So the fact that there's already friendships that happen in the community is quite a fantastic one. We love to see some of those. And I do hope that you're also forming, your own relationships and friendships as we get to interact with each other right here on the Private Property Facebook page and also across our other social media pages. Well, that's it from us here on the Private Property page. I see one of our other top fan gang members, Mata Shingang, is saying, whoop, top fan gang member. I almost want to say the other social media platforms have to step up their game. I think they need to, especially Instagram and YouTube. We need to see you guys stepping up your game. Bong's another one saying, give her the house. Unfortunately, we are not the ones selling it, Bongs. It does have a seller. I think if it was us selling it, maybe we'd see if we're able to give it to them, especially because we know that 2 top fan gang members are going to be staying in that particular house. I'm sure I would even say, listen, have a bribe for us. Let's almost all come together. And maybe that's something we can plan post-COVID. I'm still very scared of a lot of gatherings, but I'm sure post-COVID that's something that we can see if we can arrange for the top fan gang members across our social media platforms. Well, that's it from us this evening and from myself, Zama. It has been a pleasure to be with you this week. Congratulations again to Ubongani Mabunda rather, and I do hope that you're going to enjoy that 1,000 Rand cash prize. Spoil yourself, maybe you're going to invest it, maybe whatever it is that you do, certainly do enjoy that cash prize. We're back on your screens on Monday, certainly myself, and we are going to be bringing you episode 150. It's one that you do not want to miss out. We've got a really exciting plans, and I'm saying plans because I don't want to give away what exactly we're going to be doing in store for you for episode 150. It's one of those that you don't want to miss. And it's the weekend. I know a lot of you are going to be enjoying it. And you also have the opportunity to tune into the Developers Show on Saturday and Sunday at 1 o'clock with Chad, where we bring you some of the best estates that the country has on offer. Well, until then, you can catch me on my Twitter page on @zamantungwa_K. And I do hope that you have a great weekend. We're back on Monday at 7 p.m. Until then, hoping you stay home and stay safe.
I'm Rick Nedling. I'm an Olympic gold medalist and shareholder and marketing director of Weekday Estate, which recently acquired Pearl Valley Estate. I've been living in the beautiful Paul Franschhoek Valley for the last 5 years. We are situated right in the heart of the Cape Winelands. Security is our #1 priority, and it's something we work on every day. And this has earned us the reputation of being the safest estate in Africa. The lifestyle that this area has to offer truly is country living at its best. We're just 5 minutes away from the historic town of Paarl. Paarl really is an incredible area to explore, with little gems like the Spice Route and Fairview Farms. But the biggest attraction is the excellent schools. Franschhoek, on the other hand, is a major international tourist destination, and also known as the culinary capital of South Africa, with a diverse offering for every palate and occasion. Our recent acquisition of Pearl Valley is a major game changer for us. Our residents can now enjoy a wide range of amenities unmatched anywhere else in the world. There's the world-famous Jack Nicklaus Signature Golf Course, which is consistently ranked among the top golf courses in South Africa, and there are some beautiful properties on the course. Weekday really is the ideal family environment. We also cater to equestrian lovers with facilities on offer for every discipline, from the 2 Hurlingham Standard Polo Fields to our state-of-the-art equestrian centres and miles of trails. Our horses live in paradise too. Weekday has its own wine farm and cellars producing award-winning wines which every resident can be proud of. I've been blessed to travel the world, but this is the place I come home to. I'm sure you can see why we call it the Valley of Life. And this is my neighborhood.